Before the clash of heroes, before the thunder of gods, there is a moment that belongs to no one but him. A moment when the world holds its breath, when sound thins and time seems to hesitate, just long enough for a single quiet presence to step into view. The Greeks called him Thanatos, not a tyrant, not a monster, not the skeletal reaper painted in later centuries. He was something far more unsettling, the god who arrived without anger, without cruelty, without hurry. A figure who never needed to raise his voice or wield fear as a weapon. His power was the simplest in the cosmos. When he touched a mortal, the struggle ended. No pain, no violence, just release. And yet, for all his gentleness, even the gods kept their distance. Because Thanatos didn't bargain, he didn't bend, he didn't change his mind. He was the one force that refused to yield, even to kings, heroes, sometimes even to Olympus itself. Most gods ruled domains filled with noise, storms, oceans, war, desire. But Thanatos ruled a single moment, the final one. And in that single moment, mortals found both fear and comfort. He was terrifying because he came for everyone. He was comforting because he came without cruelty. His stories are rare, but the ones that survive reveal a figure unlike any other in Greek mythology. A peaceful guide to the end of life, a shadow who follows the living from the moment they're born, and a quiet reminder that even the brightest flame must someday dim. This is the story of Thanatos, the god of death, the gentle twin of sleep, and the inescapable presence who walks behind every mortal path, whether invited or not. Thanatos was born in a place where even the gods hesitated to look. A realm before daylight, before law, before the familiar architecture of Olympus took shape. His mother was Nyx, the primordial goddess of night, a being so ancient and so powerful that even Zeus respected her boundaries. In the old stories, she needed no consort to create life. Her children simply emerged from her, shaped by the quiet forces that existed long before mortal imagination. Thanatos was one of those forces. Some traditions claim Erebus, the god of darkness, stood at Nyx's side when she brought him forth. But whether Thanatos rose from night alone or from the union of night and shadow, the outcome was the same. He was a child of silence, formed where light had never touched, where existence felt more like a whisper than a presence. His siblings reflected the many anxieties of human life. Hypnos, the soft veil of sleep that blurs the boundary between the living and the dead. Moros, the doom that waits for all. Eris, the discord that unravels peace. Nemesis, the inescapable justice. Geras, the slow weight of old age. And the Charis, the savage spirits of violent death. While some of Nyx's children clawed at mortals or twisted fate, Thanatos carried neither chaos nor malice. He was inevitability without cruelty. To the ancient Greeks, this mattered. They did not imagine death as a single, monstrous entity. They imagined types of death, some violent, some dishonorable, some merciful. Thanatos represented the final moment when pain finally releases its grip, when breath leaves easily and a soul slips away without resistance. Because of this, he was respected. Not worshipped, not adored, but accepted. His existence explained a truth every mortal knew, but few dared to speak. Death can arrive softly. It can come not as punishment, but as a natural closing of the story. And so Thanatos became the quiet foundation beneath every myth that followed. He didn't need temples or hymns. His presence lived in the space between one heartbeat and the next, in the hush that falls over a room when a life ends. Before heroes fought monsters, before kings rose and fell, Thanatos was already there, unseen, unchanged, and utterly necessary. The Greeks imagined Thanatos not as a monster lurking at the edge of life, but as something strangely familiar, almost comforting. Where other deities of death in world mythologies wear bones, shadows, and terror, Thanatos carried an entirely different presence. Most often, he was depicted as a youthful figure with wings, calm-faced and solemn, standing with the quiet confidence of someone who never needed to announce himself. His beauty wasn't radiant like Apollo's or seductive like Aphrodite's. It was gentler, soft lines, lowered eyes, and an expression that suggested understanding rather than judgment. Artists liked to show him beside his twin brother Hypnos, the god of sleep. Side by side, the resemblance was unmistakable, almost poetic. One guiding mortals into rest, the other guiding them out of it forever. Their wings were often the same shape, their posture mirrored, their roles intertwined. Viewers were meant to see death not as a violent interruption, but as a continuation of sleep's natural descent. Some depictions show Thanatos holding an inverted torch, the flame pointing downward toward the earth. It was one of his most powerful symbols. A torch raised upward represented life. A torch lowered signaled a flame fading, not extinguished abruptly, but gently dimming. Others show him carrying poppies, the flowers associated with sleep, dreams, and the easing of pain. On rare occasions, he appears with a sword, though even then, it isn't drawn in fury. It hangs loosely at his side, more ceremonial than threatening. The message was clear. Thanatos does not strike. He arrives when the moment has already unfolded. Classical funerary art painted him in soft, steady colors, no jagged lines or chaotic scenes. He was shown lifting the fallen gently beneath their arms, helping them rise, guiding them toward the realm where no struggle remained. The Greeks didn't need horror to imagine the end of life. They needed peace. And so, in vase paintings, sculpture, and mythic imagery, Thanatos became the face of a truth everyone eventually learns. Death doesn't always come roaring. Sometimes it comes quietly, with a hand on the shoulder, looking very much like rest. For all the fear that surrounds death, the Greeks never imagined Thanatos as cruel. His presence in myth feels understated, almost restrained, as though he understood a truth that mortals struggled to accept. The end of life doesn't need to be violent. It can just simply be. Thanatos carried himself with a calm that even other gods rarely possessed. He didn't roar like Poseidon, or burn with the intensity of Ares, or manipulate with the subtlety of Hera. He didn't judge or punish. He didn't chase mortals across the world or demand offerings to keep him away. If someone's time had come, he appeared. If it hadn't, he remained an unseen possibility, never forcing his will, never tempting fate. This made him one of the most impartial beings in Greek mythology. He treated kings and beggars the same, admired heroes and cowards with equal stillness. Death, in his eyes, didn't measure worth. It simply arrived when the story reached its closing line. And yet, despite his gentle nature, Thanatos was no weak spirit. The few times he appears physically in myth make it clear that he was a full god, not a ghostly servant. He possessed divine strength, enough to challenge or resist mortals, and enough that it took a trick, not a fight, for Sisyphus to capture him. Thanatos also moved with speed and precision, his wings carrying him swiftly toward the dying. Many poets imagined him arriving at the very second a soul began to loosen from the body, able to sense the moment of departure before it was visible to anyone else. Pain dulled in his presence, struggle eased. It wasn't mercy, just a natural part of what he was. But what defined him most wasn't a power. It was his unwavering role. Thanatos never deviated from his purpose, never acted out of vengeance or desire. He was the god who stayed true to his nature in every myth that survived. Quiet, steady, inevitable. A presence that doesn't crush mortals with fear, but settles beside them when their story is ready to close. Thanatos was not a solitary figure drifting through myth alone. He emerged from a family that embodied the most inescapable forces of human existence, a lineage that shaped how the Greeks understood fear, fate, rest, justice, and conflict. And while many of his siblings embodied turmoil, Thanatos himself remained the calm center in a storm of primordial forces. As we mentioned before, his mother, Nyx, stood at the beginning of everything. She was the night itself, mysterious, ancient, and older than the Olympian order. Even Zeus, with all his thunder and authority, respected her power. From her, Thanatos inherited not darkness in a frightening sense, but the quiet stillness that settles over the world when daylight fades. He carried the softer side of night, the silence, the slowing of breath, the gentle descent into rest. Some traditions place Erebus, the god of darkness, alongside Nyx at his creation. Erebus wasn't a ruler or a personality. He was a condition, an echo of the void from which the earliest gods emerged. If Nyx gave Thanatos serenity, then Erebus gave him gravity, a presence that felt inevitable, natural, and impossible to outrun. Among Thanatos' many siblings, none shaped his identity more than Hypnos, his twin brother. Where Thanatos guided souls at the end of life, Hypnos guided them every night into dreams. The two lived together in a quiet cave at the edge of the world, far from Olympus and mortal lands. A river of forgetfulness, Lethe, flowed nearby, its waters softening memory and easing the mind. Poets described their home not as dark and frightening, but as peaceful, hushed, untouched by conflict, a place where even gods could find rest. Hypnos and Thanatos were inseparable in symbolism. Sleep and death were understood as neighboring states, divided only by a thin veil. In art, the twins were shown carrying fallen warriors together, Hypnos closing the eyes, Thanatos lifting the soul. To the Greeks, this connection mattered deeply. It reminded them that death did not always come with violence. It could arrive the way dreams do, quietly drifting in. But not all of Thanatos' siblings embodied tranquility. The Keres, savage spirits of violent death, stood as his brutal opposite. They relished the chaos of battle, tearing at dying warriors and dragging souls from the living with bloodied claws. Thanatos never acted like them. Where they embodied terror, he embodied release. Their contrast defined the Greek understanding of fate. One death was horrific, the other gentle. Both were unavoidable. Thanatos also shared lineage with Moros, doom, Geras, old age, Nemesis, justice, and Eris, strife. Each represented a stage or consequence of mortal life. Geras led towards Thanatos. Moros foreshadowed him. Nemesis sometimes delivered mortals to his reach, and Eris often hastened their end. In their own ways, all paths eventually intersected with him. While Thanatos has many more siblings, such as Hemera, Ether, the Oneiroi, Momus, Oises, the Moirai, and the Hesperides, these figures are far less connected to his surviving myths and play a minor role in his personal story. Yet Thanatos remained the quietest among them. He wasn't a force that chased, punished, or tormented. He didn't stir conflict or accelerate fate. He simply fulfilled the moment that everything in his family's vast web of powers eventually pointed toward. Thanatos never takes a consort, nor is he given children or lovers. The Greeks seem to understand that the moment he governs, the final breath, belongs to no dynasty or union, only to inevitability itself. In a lineage filled with harsh inevitabilities, Thanatos became the one presence that softened the blow, not by preventing death, but by making it something more than violence or fear. Something natural, final, and complete. Hey everyone, before we continue, I've got some exciting news. My weekly video is now live on my new channel, Index Unknown. That's where I dive into the hidden side of history, the secrets, the theories, the conspiracies, the things they don't want you to know. The latest upload explores the legend of Lemuria, the rumored lost civilization said to have vanished beneath the ocean, leaving behind scattered clues across ancient cultures. From mysterious ruins to theories of an advanced society erased from history, it's a story that blends myth with mystery. And if you enjoy the mythology videos I make here, I think you'll really like this one too. The link's below if you're interested. Check it out after this video. The first time Thanatos steps fully into a surviving myth, it is because a mortal went too far. Sisyphus, king of Corinth, had a talent for survival that bordered on arrogance. He tricked travelers, deceived gods, and believed himself clever enough to outrun fate itself. But when he betrayed Zeus by exposing one of the gods' secrets, the king of Olympus decided the game was over. He summoned Thanatos and ordered him to bring Sisyphus into the underworld. Thanatos arrived at the palace quietly, without thunder or spectacle. He didn't need intimidation. Mortals felt his presence in their bones, the deep, instinctive recognition that the end had come. But Sisyphus wasn't like other men. Instead of collapsing in fear, he welcomed Thanatos with feigned humility, pretending to accept his fate. He offered a tour of his palace, spoke warmly to his divine visitor, and led him toward a set of iron shackles forged under the guise of a curiosity he wished to show. What Thanatos didn't expect was treachery. Before he realized what was happening, the shackles snapped shut around him. They were crafted with a kind of magic designed not to kill a god, but to restrain one. And in that moment, death itself was bound. The world felt the consequences immediately. No mortal died, not soldiers, not the sick, not the elderly. Warriors were pierced by spears and simply continued fighting, unable to fall. The wounded groaned endlessly but never slipped into stillness. Priests panicked. Physicians were helpless. Funerals stalled because no one passed on. Ares, the god of war, felt the disturbance more than anyone. Battles lost their meaning when men refused to die. War became chaos without resolution. Furious, Ares stormed into Corinth, tore the enchanted shackles apart, and freed Thanatos by force. Once released, Thanatos did not hesitate. He returned to Sisyphus immediately, not out of vengeance, but because unfinished tasks were not in his nature. He reclaimed the mortal who had tricked him and carried him toward the underworld, restoring balance with a single, quiet act. The world exhaled again. Life and death resumed their rhythm. But Sisyphus's punishment was far from over, and Thanatos' role in his story became a warning whispered through Greek culture. Outwit kings, defy gods if you dare, but no one escapes the touch of gentle death forever. The story of Alcestis is one of the rare moments in Greek mythology where Thanatos arrives not for a wicked king or a doomed warrior, but for someone whose only crime was love. Alcestis, queen of Pherae, was known for her devotion to her husband, Admetus. When Admetus learned he was fated to die young, the god Apollo, grateful for past kindness, negotiated a strange bargain on his behalf. Admetus could live, but only if someone else willingly took his place in death. No father stepped forward, no loyal companion, only Alcestis. She offered her life without hesitation, believing that her sacrifice would keep her family intact. And when her final hour arrived, Thanatos came to collect what fate had promised. He didn't burst into the palace with violence or fury. He appeared quietly at the queen's bedside, a solemn figure whose presence dimmed the room like the last light of dusk. He did not gloat. He did not threaten. He simply performed his duty, the same way he always had. To him, Alcestis's choice was tragic, but it was hers, and he honored it. In some retellings, Thanatos carries a blade made not for punishment, but for separation, used to cut a lock of the dying's hair as an offering to the dead. It was a ritual gesture, a formal acknowledgement that a life had reached its conclusion. As he moved to claim Alcestis, her body weakened and her breath thinned, yet Thanatos remained calm, gentle even, as though he understood the weight of her sacrifice. But fate is complicated in myth, and heroes often arrive in the spaces where inevitability feels strongest. Heracles, a guest of Admetus, unaware of the tragedy unfolding, learned belatedly of Alcestis's choice. Struck by guilt and respect, he stormed after Thanatos, confronting the god at the very threshold between the living and the dead. And in that rare moment, Thanatos faced a challenge, not from arrogance or trickery like Sisyphus, but from a hero fighting for a life undeservedly lost. Heracles did not plead. He grappled with Thanatos directly, wrestling the god in a clash that poets describe as fierce, yet strangely honorable. Thanatos resisted, bound by his role, but Heracles' strength was legendary and his determination was absolute. In the end, Thanatos relented. He released Alcestis, allowing her to return to the world of the living. It was one of the few times in all Greek mythology where Thanatos yielded, not out of weakness, but out of recognition that even death can step aside for extraordinary courage. When Alcestis returned home, she did so because a god allowed it. Thanatos resumed his path, unchanged, unresentful, ready to guide the next soul whose time had come. But in the memory of that moment, mortals glimpsed something they rarely considered. Not that death can be defeated, but that even the quiet god of endings respects a life offered in love. The Trojan War brought countless heroes to their final breath, but few deaths stirred the heavens the way Memnon's did. He was the son of Eos, the dawn goddess, and a warrior whose presence on the battlefield shone like the first light of morning. When he arrived to aid Troy, many believed he carried destiny at his back. Yet even demigods bleed, and even dawn must yield to dusk. When Achilles struck Memnon down, the world seemed to dim. The clang of metal faded. Soldiers paused, sensing that something sacred had ended. And into that silence descended Thanatos. He appeared not as a conqueror, but as a guide. His wings folded softly behind him, his steps unhurried as he approached the fallen hero. Memnon did not writhe or rage. His story had simply reached its final moment, and Thanatos came to honor it. There was something almost ceremonial in the way the god prepared to lift his soul, as though he understood that Memnon's life had burned brightly enough to deserve gentle passage. But Thanatos was not the only divine presence drawn to the scene. A golden glow broke across the horizon, deeper and more sorrowful than any sunrise. Eos descended, grief pouring from her like light. She knelt beside her son, her tears falling onto the dust where his blood had spilled. Dawn itself mourned him, and as she looked up, she saw Thanatos standing over the body. Eos begged him to wait. She pleaded with Zeus, her voice trembling with a mother's desperation. She argued that Memnon had fought with honor, that his story was not meant to end here. The world held its breath, watching a mother try to shield her son even from death itself. Thanatos did not interfere. He didn't argue or step back. He stood where he was, a constant reminder that mortals, even heroic ones, belonged to the cycle he embodied. His neutrality was absolute. Whatever the king of the gods decided, he would follow. Zeus listened. Moved by Eos's sorrow, he granted Memnon a gift rarely given: immortality. The fallen hero rose, freed from the path Thanatos would have guided him down, and for the briefest moment, Thanatos stepped aside. Not defeated, not diminished, simply honoring a decree greater than his own. Eos carried her son away in a radiant embrace, and the battlefield slowly returned to sound and motion. The story became a quiet reminder through Greek myth that even when gods plead, and even when heroes shine, death comes faithfully. And only the decree of Zeus can ask Thanatos to step back. For a god with so few surviving stories, Thanatos left a remarkable imprint on the Greek imagination. His presence lingered not through grand myths or heroic battles, but through symbols, quiet reminders of how the ancient world understood the end of life. His primary symbols, as we mentioned earlier, were the torch and poppies. To raise a torch was to celebrate life. To lower it was to acknowledge that a life had gently burned out. As for the poppy, its ability to ease pain, quiet the mind, and blur the boundary between consciousness and rest tied it directly to Thanatos. Yet Thanatos was more than symbols. He was a constant presence in Greek spiritual thought, especially in the Orphic tradition, which viewed death not as an ending, but a transition. In Orphic hymns, Thanatos is described as soothing to the weary, a gentle custodian who guides the soul beyond suffering. Here, he isn't a threat. He is a threshold, a necessary step toward purification, release, and whatever comes after. Some Orphic tablets place Thanatos subtly beside Hypnos, reinforcing the twin idea that sleep and death are doorways carved from the same stone, one temporary, one permanent. For Orphic believers, death was not a punishment but a reckoning, and Thanatos was the one who opened that door without malice. Greek art reinforced this gentle perspective. On white ground lekythoi, funeral vases placed beside graves, Thanatos and Hypnos appear together carrying the body of a fallen youth. This was how the Greeks preferred to imagine the final passage, not a struggle, but a carrying. And yet, even these depictions only hint at a larger mythological presence now lost. Ancient vase painters show Thanatos in scenes we can't match to any surviving text. Early poets referenced him in works that vanished centuries ago. Tragic playwrights spoke of him indirectly, especially in stories like Iphigenia or Macaria, where death was expected but the specifics of the god's role were left to the audience's imagination. These fragments suggest that Thanatos stood behind more myths than we will ever recover, a quiet figure woven throughout Greek storytelling even when he was unnamed. Over time, his image evolved. In Rome, he became Mors, sometimes portrayed as feminine, sometimes as a ghostly presence appearing in dreams. Unlike the Greek Thanatos, who was youthful and serene, Mors could be eerie or skeletal, shaped as much by Roman superstition as by Greek philosophy. Later still, in medieval Europe, Mors' iconography helped inspire the cloaked figure of death that modern culture knows so well. Ironically, this later image had little in common with Thanatos' original nature. Through all these transformations, the core of Thanatos remained, a god who did not kill, but escorted, who did not chase, but arrived, who did not punish, but completed the story. Even without temples, even without worship, Thanatos endured, not through fear, but through recognition. The Greeks saw in him something universal, something inevitable, something strangely gentle. And in the quiet symbols he left behind, they preserved the truth that death, at its softest, feels less like a fall and more like a final goodbye.